Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And today we're going to go back down the comparison rabbit hole by looking at the Canon EOS R, the EOS R5, utilizing the Canon RF 24-70 f2.8 lens. Now, I had done a previous comparison video between the R, the R5, and also the R6 on the channel, and there was a lot of great information that folks shared in the comments. But I want to address a few things from that previous video before we get into this one today and talk about what we're going to do in this video today. In that previous video, I stated up toward the front of the video, and I think a few folks missed this, that there is a plethora of information about these camera bodies on the YouTube platform. I chose not to do my review trying to just do a generic gear review, giving you all the bells and whistles. I took my review through the idea of what I was looking for in an upgrade from my Canon EOS R, which is my current camera body that I use from Canon. I'm aware that the R5 and the R6, they have a lot of different upgrades in them that make them very versatile cameras for all types of genres of photography and uses. And I do think that they are good cameras. They are good upgrades. Dual card slots, in-body image stabilization, a better sensor, a more new sensor in the camera, and so forth. That's not in question. The question was, in that first comparison video, which of these camera bodies is the best for your dollars right now, the resources that you have? But I want to make one more blanket statement, not only for these comparison videos, but for all the videos on this channel and this channel in general. And that statement is this: there is no one right way of doing anything. Now, I've said this before in relation to Photoshop, but I want to say it again for photography, for business, for everything in our industry. There is never one right answer. It is a matter of perspective that is unique to you and where you are in the industry. If you encounter anybody that tells you, nope, my way is the only way of doing something, they're wrong. The best way for you to gather all the information that you need to make the right decisions for you in your career and where it is in this industry is to simply gather perspectives from other working professionals, other hobbyists, other people who are artists that have dared to go on this journey. When you've gathered those perspectives, put it through one vital filter, and that filter is what's best for me, what's best for the resources that I have, and what's best for my intentions and my travels of my career. So today's video, we're going to compare the R5 and the R using the RF 24-70 f2.8 lens, and we're going to be looking at two separate sets of images, both of them photographed in the studio with normal studio lighting. That was one of the things that I got from a lot of folks in the previous video saying, well, you're only doing this in gel lighting and it would look totally different if you did it with studio lights. You're absolutely correct. And in that video, I said, hey, I'm looking at this comparison in one of the genres that I work in, which is gel photography. But I wanted to see for myself too, in studio, how these two cameras are working out. And I chose not to include the R6 because the R6 is not going to be a viable option for me. Now, I stated the reason why in the previous comparison video, but I'll say it here one more time. The R6 is a great camera. It's a 20 megapixel sensor. The R is a 30 megapixel sensor, and the R5 is a 45 megapixel sensor. I want to move forward and get more out of the sensor, not take a step backward. That doesn't mean that I do not believe the R6 is a good camera. I simply don't want to go in that direction. Now, a lot of folks have stated that, megapixels isn't everything and you don't need all that data. And if you need to upscale the image, you can use programs and so forth. They're absolutely correct. But here's the deal. I've been doing this for 20 years. What I expect out of my artwork, and this is just for me, what I expect out of my artwork is a lot of good data to work with. And I've seen the evolution of my gear. And when I hit 30 megapixels, I will never go back to anything less than that. It's not saying that's the right thing to do for everybody. It's just what's right for me. So with all of that in mind, let's begin this comparison video today by diving into Adobe Lightroom and pixel counting two images that are almost the same and seeing which camera does a better job gathering that information. Introductions, as always, to get us started. This is my wonderful friend Danielle. You've seen her in the recent videos here on the channel. If you'd like to see more of her amazing artwork, visit the Instagram account at the link below. So the image on the left is from the R5. The image on the right is from the R. And let me state up front that I'm not an avid Lightroom user. I've had Lightroom since like Lightroom 2, but I'm a Photoshop boy. So if my hotkey clicking game is off, you now understand why. So there's something interesting to note the moment we look at these two images, and it's from a luminosity perspective and from a color perspective. So the image on the right from the R looks a little bit brighter than the R5 image, the one on the left. And if we look at the sweater on the image on the right, the colors look just a little flat compared to the colors of the sweater on the image on the left. Now, both of these cameras were set to the exact same settings. The portrait options and raw and the power of the light stayed the same. She might have moved just a touch between both of these images, but not enough to warrant or to explain a brighter image. So this is a reflection, I think, of the sensor. It's utilizing the same lens, and I was roughly in the same position. So that's something interesting to know. And you may think, well, the R, if it's brighter, that's a good thing, right? It's a brighter image. I can use it, it does better in low light settings. I don't think that's necessarily the case here. And to me, it is easier to add light to an image in Photoshop than it is to take it away. So to a certain degree. When I look at the image on the left and I look at the R5 image, I would rather have more contrast in the image than what I see on the right. Now, the image on the right, with just a little bit of adjustment, bring the highlights down, add a touch of contrast, maybe just a touch of saturation, they should match each other. So the image on the right, the R, can definitely be adjusted to visibly match the R5. It's a question of how many steps do we have to keep taking with the R before it becomes a question of we're going too far with it, too much, to try to compensate with what we see with the R5. But also, let me state this up front too, that the original assertion in the first video was these two cameras have a massive price difference between them. So ultimately, it's a question and a decision about resources. That's what I'm looking at. Is the R good enough? So at the time of this recording, the R5 is still $3,900 USD, and the R is $1,800 USD. $2,100 difference. So for $2,100, if I have to make just a couple of minute little changes to be able to physically match, which is not really what I'm ever going to be doing as an artist, is it worth $2,100? I have no problem making little minute changes to a couple of sliders like that really quickly and save myself $2,100. As a matter of fact, I would like to take that $2,100 and buy new lenses. So at this point, on that first thing that I notice, which is a difference between these two images, I think the R is okay. Let's zoom in and start pixel counting, and keep this in mind. The R5 is a 45 megapixel sensor. We're going to notice some differences between these two images simply based upon that. It's a question of how far. How far does the 45 megapixels go compared to the 30? Now, if you have seen the previous videos on the channel where I talk about gel photography and lighting, I do mention that I feel like the R5 is stronger than the R when it comes to gels, specifically the ways that I'm capturing them right now, utilizing some new lighting units from a company called Luminate. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you haven't seen those videos, take a look at the card above. It will take you to them when you're done with this one today. So I've already stated that I like the R5 when it comes to gels, which is something that I do on the regular. But looking at this portrait work, that's another decision maker for me, or another factor to go into the decision making. So let's zoom in and start looking at her eyes. That's where the AI eye auto detection was set, and it captured her eyes. I made sure it did when I took those images. So both are tack sharp. I think both look really good. The R5 definitely looks stronger because there is more data to work with. And we're seeing just a slight size disparagement here. Part of that is framing from when I took the image, and part of that is also, I think, a reflection of the 45 megapixels, but they're pretty close here, so we can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. I feel like the data obviously is much, much stronger in the R5, but I think the R is pretty close. Again, with a little hint of a touch to texture and clarity, maybe sharpening just a touch, it's going to get us on par with the base file that we see from the R5. One of the things that I find interesting here is where her jawline meets her hair. Because, whoa, what's going on, Lightroom? I hate Lightroom. So, oh my goodness gracious. Okay, right here. This area feels stronger in the data than... I hate Lightroom. I hate it. If you all like it, cool. I hate it. The image on the right, the R, that crevice where her jaw goes into her hair, and go with me on this, it doesn't feel as strong. Some may say, well, why are you focusing? Because we're looking at all the areas of data around her face, which is where we targeted the focus to be. I feel like it's a little less. That's fine. It should be. It's a reflection of the megapixels. But as we travel down, looking at her neck, so in her throat and her neck through here, that three-dimensional shift. So the focus is on her eye. This is photographed at f11 ISO 400, 1/160th of a second. When we look at this, in that three-dimensional area that goes down beyond the plane of the eye, the data feels stronger on her neck. The contrast is certainly stronger, which we've already noted, but all that in conjunction together, I'm starting to feel the R5, clearly it's a stronger image. It's a 45 megapixel sensor, and it's a new sensor by 2 generations compared to the R. The R uses the digit 8, and the R5 uses the digit 10 or the digit X, however they're choosing to pronounce it. Those color changes, that's a big one to me. That saturation of color on the left is very noticeably different to me. And that's something that could be a pretty big factor, I think, in choices to make. I guess the bottom line for me is both images are good. Both images are sharp and strong. I like the data and what I feel like I can do with it from the R. I definitely like the data and know that I could probably push it just a touch further with the R5. But again, we go back to that question, is it worth $2,100? And again, as I stated in the beginning, dual card slots and all kinds of fancy stuff in the R5 are also other elements to help you make that choice. But if you're just a portrait photographer, you don't photograph weddings or one-off events where you need that second card slot, you're not needing all the bells and whistles of all the video options that are inside of it for filmmaking. Do you want to spend $2,100 to take pictures in your studio? If you're if you're upgrading, or if you're just buying a new camera outright. Now, if you're buying a new camera outright, and I think I've said this in the previous video, it is worth considering investing in something like the R5 or the R6, because ultimately, it's a common rule of consumerism. The newer gear is going to last you longer on your journey in business and in your career. But I also had the Canon 6D for years before I upgraded to the R. And the logical upgrade way back would have been the Canon 5D Mark III, then the Mark IV. And I didn't buy them because they were incredibly expensive. And I liked the 6D. And I won awards with the 6D. We made money with the 6D. I'm not saying that to boast. I'm saying that it's not necessarily always the gear. It's the talking monkey behind it that pushes the button that, makes the art go round. So I think from a pixel counting perspective, we can hopefully all agree that the R does a fine job and the R5 is stronger. And I leave it up to you to decide whether it's $2,100 stronger or not. But now let's dive into Photoshop and take a look at Adobe Camera Raw and 2 other images, and we'll start working on those to see how we can push and pull that data to our advantage. So in Adobe Camera Raw, the image on the top is the image from the Canon EOS R, and the one on the bottom is the Canon EOS R5. Now again, we're seeing instantaneously that the R is just a touch brighter. The colors are a little bit different, a little more flat than what we see from the R5. So let's go ahead and see if we can solve that problem. So I'm going to come to the Basic tab. I'm going to pull the highlights down by like -3, it's fine. Let's go ahead and give it just a touch more contrast. So +2, and let's adjust the global saturation by +3. And now do the before and after. Those highlights can come down just one more point to -4, -5, 6. Yeah, close. Very close. And just a little bit of a push in some of those basic adjustments that you would look at when you want to process a raw image in Adobe Camera Raw or Capture One or any other raw converter. So that question again, do you want to spend $2,100 more, $2,100 more to save that amount of time and making that little minute of adjustment? And keep in mind that we're making that comparison adjustment right now for these two images for this experiment. But as a photographer of these cameras, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be looking at it saying, okay, I have to potentially pull the highlights down of every single image that I capture with the R if it winds up being too bright. Or do you just adjust the lighting and the power of the lights? Do you make minute adjustments for yourself on how those images are captured? And ultimately, that's a question that's up to you and the resources that you have. But let's go ahead. I'm going to reset this so that we can get it back to where it was, because I want to start syncing both of these as we make changes so we can just see how the information is being pushed. Now, this lighting pattern is one that I favor a lot. It's Rembrandt lighting. I really like the storytelling and the drama that comes into this. And let me give you just a quick side note as to how I work as a photographer. I light photography following certain lighting patterns that I like for the mood that it creates. I am not one on set to try to utilize all of my lighting instruments and move them in minute little ways and adjust the power settings by 0.3 and point this and point it to get the perfect picture in camera. I am not one to do that because the perfection that I seek is in the final artwork itself, and a part of that journey for the final artwork is digital photo editing. Photography is half the equation. The other half to me is Photoshop. Now, it doesn't mean that I can just get some crap image on set and then try to fix it in post, but I'm not going to worry about trying to fill in every single shadow with a little reflector here and an highlighter there and this. No, I'm going to work with the emotions and story, work with the talent in front of the camera. I want to get the lights to as close of a place as I can and then shoot and capture, knowing what I can do in Photoshop. So because this is a lighting pattern that I like to use on the regular, one of the things that I find myself always doing is trying to lift the shadows. So I'm curious to see how the R5 compares with noise to the R. So let's start making some basic changes. First, I'm going to come down to the optics tab and select that for both of these images. I'm going to select both of them and hit Alt or Option and the S key for sync. And that will synchronize all the changes that I've made, which is simply that optics tab. The optics tab is going to overcome the chromatic aberrations of the lens, but more importantly use profile corrections, which is populating the Canon RF 24-70 f2.8 corrections that we should be able to see there. So now both of them have overcome the distortions of the lens. Let's come into the R, and I'm going to come up to the basic tab, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit and pull out the shadows. Now I'm going to pull them out visually. I'm not caring about the number. I'm looking at the image. I want to see just a little bit more of what's in those shadows, but I don't want them to be completely gone like that. I just want to see a little bit more information that's there. And this is a step that I will often take when I use a lighting style like Rembrandt lighting to get this dramatic storytelling with the lights. So I'm going to push it. It's at +34. Select both images, Alt Option, the S key to sync. And now let's look at both of them and see. Shadows are at 34. The shadows feel just a touch darker in the R5. And again, it's probably a reflection of the contrast capture and the light capture in the R and that sensor. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more because I want to see that noise. The noise looks great on the R5. For giggles, I'm going to pull it out even more. Yeah, I don't see any artifacts in it. It's being handled pretty well. I mean, we see a little bit of that like checkerboard pattern, if you will, of the information, but I think it's being handled just fine. Zoom in even more. Wait, what was this one? So R5 is at +56 for shadow. Let's do the same thing here. We'll go to 56 for the, ooh, Hello Kitty. Wow. This is what I feared. This is what I found in the previous video on gels. The noise in the R it's being handled well. I don't see any artifacts. I don't see any weird distortions or mottling in the color, but that checkerboard pattern is just being put together so much more cleanly in the R5 than it is with the R. And that's a big deal to me. Because again, as I said, when I work and when I light, whether it be gel photography, studio portraits, composites, I often need to push and pull the highlights and shadows, the light and dark of an image. I need to push those pixels for all they're worth sometimes. And the consequence of that is always noise. It's always how the data is being handled in areas, especially in shadow, where the sensor just didn't have enough light to capture all of the information that was there and put it together in the best way on that raw file. Yeah, the noise, hands down, is just so much better from the R5. That coupled with the extra megapixels at 45, I feel like part of how it's being handled is that there is more pixel information and data to kind of work, Photoshop to work with it, to put it together in a better way. And that's going to come into play when you look at an image and a composition like this, where, you know, if Danielle wanted this to be, you know, a rather close-up headshot, of course I can push the 45 megapixels further than I can 30 megapixels. Because when we resize an image size, Photoshop is taking all of that pixel data and making up new information based upon the average around every single pixel. So the more that it has to work with, the better. More is better in this case. But is it worth $2,100? And that's where, you know, other factors, yes, to be fair, come into play, like the dual card slot and IBIS and all that fliz. But oh, that's tough for me. I'm going to hit Controller Command and the number 0 to put. Let's go ahead and work on this image. Let's work on both of these just a little bit more. So I'm gonna process these as if I were preparing them to take them into Photoshop for a retouch. So I'm going to pull out the black point just a little bit, pull the white point down. No, first I'm gonna pull the highlights down because I think that highlight on her right cheek on camera left is just a little too strong. Okay, we'll pull that highlight down just a little bit more. I do think it needs a touch of contrast in those shadows. Maybe just a global exposure because I want to lift the shadows a little bit more, which means the highlights have to come back down again. Let's push the white point down. Definitely need to add some global saturation. I don't like how unsaturated it is, which is just bizarre. And I'm going to give it a couple points of vibrance. I'm going to come to the color mixer and come to the yellow tab because Danielle has blonde hair and she's got fair skin, Caucasian skin. I want to pull the hue away from the greens and just start shifting them just a little bit toward more of the oranges. Now that's something that I have noticed in the R as far as color is concerned, and a lot of other friends of mine have said the same thing, that the R favors a little bit more green than it does red. The R favors more green than red in the RGB mix of the sensor. So I always tend to try to push the yellows and the oranges just a little bit away from that green part of the spectrum. Okay, so let's go ahead and you know, we can see here there's a lot to play with the yellows in her hair and in her skin tone. So I feel like I'm right to push those a little bit more toward orange yellow instead of those greens. Okay, the orange sliders are fine. I'm going to give it just a boost to the saturation of orange because, as you can see, that is the primary color that we're working with here. Every human being on Earth, regardless of your ethnicity, we all have orange and yellow and red in our skin tones. So that looks pretty good. I think it's a decent process. So let's go ahead and select the bottom image, and I'm hitting Alt or Option and the S key for synchronize to synchronize both. I just feel like the R5 is a stronger image. I feel like I'm looking at a sharper, more detailed image in the R5 than I am with the R. And I like the R, I really do. I like what I see here. It's sharp. Look at her eye, it's sharp. There's a lot of texture here. There's things to work with. If we zoom in and look at that R5, it's just noticeably different and it feels stronger. I guess I should have come up with a definitive answer before I recorded this video. Like, you know, what's your platform going to be, David, so that people will not flame you in the comments for indecision. So with that, I'm going to take a little break and think about it, and we'll be back with the final thoughts for this video today. I am at a place in my career where there are multiple needs of my gear. Not only the genres that I follow, but all the extra work that I'm looking to do, the revenue streams that I'm looking to explore as an artist and as a business person. Knowing that the R5 has more of that information that can be pushed is important to me. The filmmaking options were one of the bigger reasons why I was looking at the R5, especially for recording content for this channel. So in a way, my answer to all of you is a little bit easier because I know I will be able to get more filmmaking options out of the R5 than I can with the R. Knowing that I have a stronger set of data to work with, the colors look a little bit better and sharper and stronger. Canon's rumored to have 3 new camera bodies coming out in 2021. One of them is supposedly going to be this massive, like anywhere from 70 to 95 megapixel camera. And the filmmaking options in it are going to be severely compromised so that they can work with the sensor to be that powerful for photography. There's also the rumor that potentially there's going to be a Canon EOS Mark II, even though it's not going to be called that it will be a 30 megapixel sensor and all the other bells and whistles. I'm still going to wait to see what those are. I want to see those new bodies. I want to see the price points. And being honest, I want to see if the price points of the R5 drop a little bit. Now, if all 3 of those new bodies come out and they're trash, and the big fancy one that's 75, 90 megapixels is ridiculous from a price perspective, then I would consider upgrading to the R5 sometime this summer in 2021. And I'm making that decision for myself because I know that it isn't I must have the best of the best. I am attracted to more data in those images. I am pulled as an artist to have more information to work with, especially that noise handling. With either the gel work that I do, the regular studio portrait work that I do, the composite work, that's where I'm really landing on. All the fantasy and cosplay composite work that I do, I need to be able to push that data as much as possible. And teaching, once COVID is eradicated from planet Earth, I'll be returning to teaching workshops and at conferences. And there is always an element of run and gun. There's always an element of needing the best out of your gear because sometimes you can't take 17 different lights and modifiers with you. So knowing that I can push those pixels just a little bit further helps me to feel more confident in those future settings for myself as an artist and as a business person. So that's where I'm at. I will upgrade to the R5 sometime this summer once all the new information is out, but I want to know from you all. I want to know what you think about these 2 camera bodies. The comparison video today, of course, if it's helpful to you, but where would you spend that $2,100? What lenses do you look at that you want to grab a hold of that will help you go further in your business? Tell me your one answer that makes sense for you. That's the end of this video today. If you like the content you found in it, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel because new content debuts each week in photography and Photoshop education. And when you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.